Brittany was just 7 years old when her parents sat her down in the living room and told her they were getting a divorce. There was no yelling, no fighting, just two adults who had decided they no longer wanted to be together. She clutched her worn-out teddy bear, watching as they calmly explained that they would live separately from now on. She didn't cry. Maybe she was too young to fully understand, or maybe their calmness made her think it wasn't something to be scared of. They divided everything neatly. Her mother got the house, her father moved into an apartment, and Brittany got 2 bedrooms. The custody arrangement was simple. 1 week with mom, 1 week with dad. Despite the separation, her father made sure Brittany and her mother were taken care of financially, never missing a single payment or support check. At first, things didn't seem so bad. Her time with mom was the same as before, cuddling on the couch, bedtime stories, and pancakes on Saturday mornings. But then, about a year after the divorce, her father introduced her to Sarah. Sarah was different from the women Brittany had met before. She had kind eyes, a warm smile, and a son named Tommy, who was 3 years younger. Unlike her father's previous dates, Sarah didn't try too hard or act overly sweet. She was just real. And more importantly, she treated Brittany like she mattered. When Sarah and Brittany's father got married, they made sure Brittany and Tommy felt like part of something bigger. "You know, Brittany," Sarah had said one night while tucking her in, "I always wanted a daughter. Thank you for letting me be part of your life." Brittany hugged her tight, already feeling like she had found a place where she truly belonged. Things at her mother's house, however, were different. Her mother, Patricia, had started dating Richard, and before Brittany knew it, he had moved in. Patricia seemed happier, but also more distracted. Brittany often caught her mother absent-mindedly touching her stomach when she thought no one was looking. Then Emily was born. Brittany had stood in the hospital room, staring at the tiny pink bundle in her mother's arms. Richard hovered over them, his entire focus on his wife and new daughter. Brittany shifted on her feet, watching what felt like a family portrait being painted, one she was no longer a part of. At first, she told herself it was normal. Of course, babies needed more attention. But as time passed, she began to notice the difference. Her mother stopped asking about her school day, forgot to pack her lunch, and sometimes even forgot she was supposed to pick her up. Slowly, Brittany started fading into the background. At first, Brittany tried to tell herself it was normal. Babies needed more attention, and her mother was just adjusting to having Emily around. But as the months passed, the little things started to add up. Her mother stopped asking about her day. Their bedtime stories disappeared. Even the small traditions, like Saturday morning pancakes, became a thing of the past. If Brittany tried to talk about school or a book she was reading, Patricia would nod absent-mindedly while rocking Emily or scrolling through her phone. Then came the forgotten events. It started with small things. A missed recital, a parent-teacher meeting she never showed up to. Brittany tried to brush it off, telling herself that her mother was just busy. But then one day, it rained. She had stayed after school for a parent-teacher conference. One by one, she watched the other kids leave with their parents, their coats pulled tight around them as they ran to their cars. Brittany stood near the entrance, shivering as the rain poured down. Mrs. Johnson, her fourth-grade teacher, waited with her for nearly an hour before finally calling Patricia. "Oh my God, was that today's?" Her mother's voice crackled through the phone. "I'm so sorry. I was at Emily's Mommy and Me class. Can we reschedule?" They never did. That was the moment Brittany stopped making excuses for her. By the time her 10th birthday arrived, she had already learned to keep her expectations low. But still some part of her hoped. She ran downstairs that morning, expecting at least a happy birthday. Instead, she found her mother fussing over Emily's breakfast. "Mom," Brittany said hesitantly, standing in the doorway. "Do you know what date it is?" Patricia barely looked up. "Tuesday," she mumbled before sighing. "Oh, I need to take Emily to her doctor's appointment." Brittany's heart sank. "It's my birthday." Her mother finally looked up, her eyes widening. "Oh, Brittany, I'm so sorry. We'll celebrate this weekend, okay? I just have so much going on today." The weekend came and went. No cake. No presents. No celebration. It became easier to stay at her father's house. Sarah always made sure her favorite snacks were stocked in the pantry, and Tommy treated her like a real sibling. Her father never missed a school event, and Sarah was always there too, beaming like Brittany was her own daughter. A few extra days turned into weeks, then months. Her mother barely seemed to notice. She was too wrapped up in Emily, taking her to playdates, dressing her in matching outfits, snapping photos of her perfect little family. Then, one evening, Brittany's father sat her down. "I called your mom today," he said gently. "I think it makes sense for you to live here permanently. You're already here most of the time anyway. I told her I'd stop the alimony payments since I'm taking care of you full-time now." Within hours, Patricia was at the door, her face full of forced concern. "Sweetie, I've missed you so much," she said, hugging Brittany for the first time in what felt like forever. "I want us to go back to our original arrangement. I want you home half the time, like before." Brittany was 12 by then, old enough to see through it. The sudden affection, the empty promises. It wasn't about missing her. It was about missing the money. By the time Brittany turned 12, she had stopped expecting her mother's affection. The truth had settled in like a heavy weight in her chest. Her mother didn't want her. She wanted what came with her. The alimony checks. The financial support. The moment her father stopped sending money, Patricia suddenly remembered she had an older daughter.
Brittany didn't buy it.
She had seen too much. The way her mother's eyes lit up only when talking about Emily's achievements. The way Richard barely acknowledged her presence. And worst of all, the way Emily, her half-sister, had picked up on the way their parents treated Brittany and used it to her advantage. It started small. Snide comments. Smirks when no one was looking. But as Emily grew older, she became bolder. "Daddy says you're not really part of our family," she told Brittany one evening as she did her homework at the kitchen table. Brittany clenched her jaw, focusing on the math problems in front of her. Emily, just 8 years old but already full of the same entitlement as her father, leaned in closer. "Mommy and Daddy love me more than you," she whispered. "Last night, Daddy told Mommy he was tired of you being here. And Mommy said, just wait until she turns 18. Then the money stops and she'll be gone." Brittany's hands tightened around her pencil. She knew Emily was just repeating what she had heard, but that didn't make it hurt any less. By the time Brittany reached high school, her visits to her mother's house had dwindled to almost nothing. It wasn't a conscious decision, just something that happened naturally. At her father's house, she was wanted. She was loved. Sarah helped her with school projects. Tommy was like a real brother, and her father never missed a single important moment in her life. Her mother, on the other hand, never asked about her grades, never cared about her plans, never wondered if she was okay. The final nail in the coffin came at Brittany's high school graduation. She sat between her two families at the ceremony, one on each side. Her father, Sarah, and Tommy beamed with pride, cheering loudly when her name was called. Her mother and Richard, on the other hand, barely reacted. After the ceremony, her father wrapped her in a tight hug. "We are so proud of you, Princess," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah nodded beside him, her eyes glistening. But her mother and Richard? As soon as they reached the parking lot, Richard jingled his car keys and turned to her. "So, have you started packing yet?" Brittany blinked. "Packing? For college," her mother said, her voice too casual. "You'll be moving out soon, right? Your room would make a great office for Richard." They didn't ask about where she was going. They didn't ask about her future plans. They didn't even pretend to care. That was the moment Brittany truly accepted the truth. Her real family wasn't the one she was born into. It was the one that had chosen her. The one that had loved her, not for what she could provide, but simply for who she was. 2 weeks later, she moved the last of her things into her father's house. "Are you nervous about college?" Sarah asked as they sat in the living room, going over her schedule. Brittany hesitated, then shook her head. Not really. She had already survived the hardest lesson life had to offer. She had learned that blood didn't make a family. Love did. Brittany had always been a planner. Maybe it was a survival instinct she developed after years of feeling like an afterthought in her mother's house. But when it came to her future, she refused to leave anything to chance. The summer before college, She sat in her father's living room, nervously twisting the acceptance letter in her hands. I got into the financial analyst program, she told them, her voice careful, measured. I got a partial scholarship, but… Before she could even finish, her father and Sarah exchanged knowing smiles. We've already got it covered, honey, Sarah said, pulling out a folder. We've been saving for your college since you were 8. Brittany stared at them, stunned. She had expected to ask for help, but she hadn't expected them to be this prepared. You really saved for me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Of course we did. We always knew you'd do great things. It was a stark contrast to her mother's indifference. College life was a blur of new experiences, long study sessions, and early morning shifts at the campus cafe. Brittany wanted to cover her personal expenses herself, even though her tuition and housing were taken care of. She worked part-time, budgeting carefully, never spending beyond her means. She liked the independence, liked knowing that every meal she bought, every book she paid for, was something she had earned. Meanwhile, her mother never called. Not once. Her first birthday away from home came and went in silence. She told herself she didn't care, but some small part of her still checked her phone that day, just in case. Nothing. Later that night, against her better judgment, she found herself scrolling through her mother's Facebook. There they were, dozens of pictures, each more carefully staged than the last. Patricia, Richard, and Emily on vacation. Emily's dance recital. Family dinners. Holiday celebrations. Each caption was worse than the last. So lucky to have such a beautiful family. Cherishing every moment with my loved ones. Brittany wasn't in a single one. She had been erased. She should have been used to it by now. But that night, she let herself cry. Not for the mother she had, but for the mother she had once wished she could have. But Brittany wasn't the kind of person to dwell on things she couldn't change. She threw herself into her studies, determined to prove she didn't need their approval to succeed. She graduated at the top of her class, earning her degree in financial analysis. That was when Sarah came to her with an opportunity. My brother Mark runs an investment firm, she told Brittany one afternoon. I told him about your academic achievements, and he wants to interview you. Brittany hesitated. I don't want any special treatment. Sarah smiled. You won't get any. He runs a tight ship. You'll have to prove yourself just like anyone else. The interview was nerve-wracking, but Mark was professional and fair. Your credentials are impressive, he told her, scanning her resume. But I need to be clear. The fact that you're my sister's stepdaughter won't earn you any favors here. You'll be expected to work just as hard as everyone else. Brittany met his gaze head-on. I wouldn't want it any other way.
She got the job.
With her first paycheck, she rented a small one-bedroom apartment near the office. It wasn't much, but it was hers. A space that belonged to her and no one else. As she unpacked, she thought about her mother. About how Patricia never once asked about her college plans. Never congratulated her on her graduation. Never showed up. And for the first time in her life, Brittany realized she no longer cared. She had built her own future without them. Brittany had always been careful with money. Years of feeling like an afterthought in her mother's house had taught her that security wasn't something you could rely on other people for. You had to build it yourself. So, after years of working hard at Mark's investment firm, she had a plan. Every month, she set aside a portion of her salary, slowly building a down payment for her first home. She wasn't looking for anything extravagant, just something modest but comfortable, with enough space for a fresh start. A place that was truly hers. Then Emily found out. It happened one afternoon when Emily came over under the pretense of bonding. Brittany had stepped into the kitchen to make coffee, leaving her laptop open on the living room table. When she returned, she found Emily staring at the screen, eyes wide with shock. "Oh my God," Emily whispered. "Is that really how much money you have saved?" Brittany's stomach tightened as she quickly shut the laptop. "It's not polite to look at other people's private information, Emily." But Emily wasn't listening. Her mind was already working. "Why are you saving so much?" she asked, her tone almost accusatory. Brittany hesitated for a second before answering. I'm planning to buy a house soon. I want to make a good down payment to keep my mortgage low. Emily just nodded, but Brittany could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. She left shortly after, making some excuse about meeting friends. The very next day, Brittany's phone rang. Her mother's number flashed on the screen, a number she hadn't seen in years unless it was by accident. Brittany, sweetheart. Patricia's voice was dripping with warmth, almost too much. How have you been? I've been thinking about you so much lately. Brittany nearly laughed out loud. 9 years of silence, and now, suddenly, her mother was feeling sentimental?
She didn't buy it.
Still, curiosity got the best of her, and she accepted an invitation to dinner. The moment she walked into her mother's house, she knew something was up. Richard greeted her with a stiff smile, and Patricia ushered her to the dining table, acting as if they had always been close. We heard you're doing very well at Mark's company, Richard said, his voice too casual. Yes, Patricia added, passing the potatoes. Emily tells me you've been saving up quite a bit. That's wonderful, honey. You know, Emily is really struggling with college expenses. And she'll need an apartment after she graduates. Brittany didn't respond, just kept eating, waiting for them to get to the point. It didn't take long. It would be so nice if her successful big sister could help her out, Patricia continued, her voice heavy with suggestion. Family helping family, you know? Brittany put her fork down. I don't understand. What are you asking me, exactly? Patricia sighed as if Brittany was being difficult. Well, you have all that money saved up. You could help your sister get an apartment. She needs it more than you do. Brittany's stomach twisted, but her voice was steady. You're asking me to give Emily my house savings? Richard chimed in, shrugging. You're already established in your career. Emily's just starting out. She needs the help more than you do. Brittany let out a short laugh, sharp, humorless. I'm not established. I'm working hard and saving my money to build my future. And I'm not giving Emily a cent. Patricia's expression darkened. So, you're just going to let your sister struggle while you sit on a pile of money? Brittany met her mother's glare with a calmness she hadn't known she possessed. A real sister would want to help, Patricia pressed. A real mother, Brittany shot back, would have been there for both of her daughters. Silence filled the room. Brittany stood up, grabbed her coat, and walked out the door. She wasn't their bank. And she sure as hell wasn't their family anymore. Brittany had worked too hard to let anything, or anyone, derail her future. She had been careful, meticulous with her savings, and had nearly everything in place to buy her first home. Then, in the middle of a busy work week, Mark called her into his office. I want you to handle a client presentation in Singapore, he said, sliding a file across his desk. It's a big opportunity, and I trust you with it. It was a career-making moment. She packed her bags, double-checked her security settings, and left for a 10-day trip overseas, unaware that while she was gone, everything was about to fall apart. The moment she landed back home, her phone exploded with notifications. Her banking app had sent dozens of alerts, withdrawals, transfers, transactions she hadn't made. Her stomach lurched as she scrolled through them, her heart hammering. $1,750 transferred. $5,000 transferred. $12,000 transferred. She rushed home, threw open her laptop and logged into her account. A massive chunk of her savings was gone. The transfer details listed an account under a name she recognized immediately, Patricia Warren. Her mother. Her hands were shaking as she tried to make sense of it. How had this happened? She had never shared her banking information with anyone. Her passwords were secure. Then she remembered. A few weeks earlier, Patricia had come to her apartment, an unannounced visit under the pretense of checking in. She had asked to use the bathroom. It had only been for a few minutes. It only takes a minute to copy a key. Fury and disbelief swirled inside Brittany as she grabbed her car keys and drove straight to her mother's house. Richard answered the door, wearing a smug expression that only fueled Brittany's rage. Where is she? She demanded, pushing past him. Patricia was sitting in the living room, flipping through a magazine as if nothing had happened. When she saw Brittany, she smiled. Oh, you're back. How was your trip? Brittany threw her phone onto the coffee table, the banking screenshots still pulled up. How did you do it? How did you get into my account? Patricia barely glanced at the screen. I don't know what you're talking about, she said smoothly. Don't lie to me, Brittany hissed. It's right here. A transfer to your account. You stole my money. Patricia finally dropped the act. She sighed, setting her magazine down. Fine, she said, smirking. Yes, I transferred the money. Emily needs an apartment, and you weren't being cooperative. Brittany's fists clenched at her sides. How did you get into my bank account? Patricia reached into her purse and pulled out a small metal key. Recognize this? She taunted. Remember when I borrowed your bathroom that day? It only takes a minute to make a copy. Brittany felt sick. Give me my money back.
Now.
Or I'm going to the police. Patricia laughed. Actually laughed. Don't be ridiculous, she scoffed. You won't send your own mother to jail. Besides, you have a great job, no responsibilities. You can save up again. Emily needs this more than you do. We've already found her the perfect apartment. Richard stepped in, grabbing Brittany's arm. I think it's time for you to leave. Brittany yanked herself free. This is your last chance. Give me back my money, or you'll regret it. Patricia waved her hand dismissively. Oh, grow up, Brittany. We both know you won't do anything about it. Brittany didn't argue. She simply turned around, walked out the door, and drove straight to the police station. The police took her complaint seriously. The evidence was overwhelming. Unauthorized transactions, bank statements, even text messages where Patricia had practically confessed. That night, Richard called her, his tone flipping between threats and desperation. You need to withdraw the complaint, he demanded. Do you have any idea what you're doing to your own mother? Brittany hung up. She had spent years suffering in silence. She wasn't going to let them walk all over her again. The legal process moved quickly. Patricia, confident that Brittany would back down, was completely unprepared for what followed. In court, she played the role of the heartbroken, remorseful mother, crying as she begged for leniency. I only wanted to help my younger daughter, she sobbed. I let my emotions cloud my judgment. The judge was unmoved. Mrs. Warren, he said sternly, your maternal instincts led you to commit theft and fraud against your own daughter. The only reason you are not facing jail time is that this is your first offense, and you have agreed to make full restitution. Patricia received a suspended sentence and was ordered to repay every penny within 30 days. Brittany watched in silence as her mother wiped away fake tears, realizing for the first time that her manipulation had failed. That night, as Brittany sat at dinner with her real family, her father, Sarah, and Tommy, Sarah reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You did the right thing, she said gently. They needed to learn they couldn't take advantage of you anymore. Tommy, as usual, found a way to lighten the mood. At least now you know which family actually loves you. He was right. The lines were clearer than ever. Brittany had her real family. And as for her mother, Richard, and Emily, they had just lost the one person they could never manipulate again. Patricia avoided jail time, but the consequences of her actions were unavoidable. The judge ordered her to return every penny within 30 days, and there was no way around it. Brittany had made sure of that.
She didn't stop there.
With the help of a lawyer, she filed a restraining order against both Patricia and Richard, ensuring they could no longer show up at her apartment or harass her for money. They had already proven what they were capable of. She wasn't about to give them another chance. Richard tried calling once, his voice dripping with frustration. Really, Brittany? A restraining order? She's your mother. She was my mother, Brittany corrected coldly before hanging up. Through the entire ordeal, Brittany never felt alone. Her father, Sarah, and Tommy were by her side every step of the way, sitting behind her in court, bringing her dinner when she was too exhausted to cook, and never once saying, I told you so. You did the right thing, Sarah reassured her. They needed to learn they couldn't keep taking advantage of you. Tommy, in his usual fashion, tried to lighten the mood. Well, at least now you know which family actually loves you. And he was right. With the money safely back in her account, Brittany finally purchased her dream home. It wasn't a mansion or anything extravagant, Just a charming three-bedroom colonial with a fenced backyard, perfect for the fresh start she had been working toward. This time, there was only one set of keys, and they belonged solely to her. 2 weeks later, Brittany sat at the dining table in her new home, surrounded by her real family. Sarah had cooked a feast. Tommy was already sprawled out on her couch with a controller in hand, and her father had brought a bottle of champagne for a toast. To Brittany, he said, raising his glass, pride shining in his eyes. For proving that you don't need toxic people in your life to succeed. To finally having a house where no one can steal from me, Brittany added with a smirk, earning a round of laughter. That night, as she stood in her new living room, looking around at the people who had truly been there for her, Brittany felt something settle in her heart, peace. She had spent years waiting for her mother to care, waiting for validation, waiting to be wanted.
But now?
She was done waiting. Sometimes, the family you choose is far more valuable than the one you are born into. And Brittany had finally found hers. For the first time in her life, she was free.